right now. Listen up, class. Let me tell you about a friend of mine who lives down in Charleston. What a groovy design. She takes a snappy dresser for a walk in the sun on a little red leash. Oh, it's so much fun. He's got a big, happy smile and a mighty long tail. The best pet a person could ever hail.
It was a Tuesday morning at Miss Betty's Cut and Curl down on King Street, a day that felt like it was being steamed in a pressure cooker. The air was a suffocating shroud, a thick, desperate marriage of aquanet, burnt chicory coffee, and the ancient primordial sulfur rising from the tidal flats like the breath of a ghost. I sat entombed under the hooded dryer, a great silver bell that hummed with a low, neurotic vibration. The rollers were wound so tight my eyebrows were practically migrating toward my hairline, providing a facelift that would have made a debutante weep with envy. I was attempting to lose myself in a 1994 issue of Southern Living, but the racket was inescapable. It wasn't the dryers. It was the unholy trinity of Charleston hearsay, Miss Clarice, Miss Murtis, and Miss Lucille, huddled near the shampoo bowls. Their freshly sprayed beehives were practically velcroed together in a conspiratorial mass of silver-blue hair, a three-headed hydra of judgment. Now, I try to remain a vessel of quietude, I really do, but when voices carry like a funeral dirge across the Ashley River, one is forced to bear witness. I'm telling you, I saw it with my own two eyes, and my eyes are still sharp enough to spot a crooked seam on a Sunday morning, Miss Murtis hissed, her voice a dramatic stage whisper that rattled the jars of barbicide. It was down near the Battery yesterday evening. That woman walking a prehistoric catastrophe on a leash, cool as you please in the twilight. Miss Clarice gasped, her hand flying to her throat as if to protect her pearls. A catastrophe? Not a feral cat. Those things are a plague upon the gardenias. Worse, Miss Murtis leaned in, her eyes wide with a frantic, feverish light. An alligator, a full-grown, scaly leviathan. It must have been 10 feet of cold-blooded sin, and she had it on one of those little pink retractable leashes, like it was a teacup poodle at a garden party. Miss Lucille shook her head, her jewelry clinking like a chain gang. It's ungodly. An alligator in the holy city? It probably devours tourists and small children whole. Lord knows what she feeds that beast to keep it from reclaiming the sidewalk. Whole hams, Miss Murtis declared with the authority of a high priestess. I heard she buys 'em by the crate at the Piggly Wiggly, and I bet it sleeps in her bed right on the Protessi linens. Or perhaps, Clarice speculated, her voice dripping with a languid southern cruelty, you know some women go to desperate, desolate lengths when the bloom has faded. I felt a twitch starting in my left eye, a little rhythmic dance of annoyance. People in Charleston talk about things they don't understand with the same confidence a rooster has about the sun. It reminded me so much of my daddy's young widow, Tiffany, the farmer Miss Mississippi back in Yazoo City, who once swore a UFO was hovering over the magnolias. She spent 3 days in the cellar with a tinfoil hat and a bottle of gin before we realized it was just a very determined, very luminous mosquito control drone. I reached up and clicked off the hooded dryer. The silence that followed was immediate and suffocating, thick as the humidity before a hurricane. The Trinity turned to me, their faces frozen in masks of startled porcelain. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the stillness like a fan through stagnant air. I leaned forward, the rollers clicking against each other with a sound like dry bones. "I couldn't help but overhear your concerns regarding the lady with the alligator. Lucille fanned herself frantically with a copy of Town and Country. "Well, actually," I continued, offering them my most unassuming Sarah Ophelia Collie Cannon on a good day smile, the one I used when Fluffy accidentally nipped the postman. He really shouldn't have been wearing those patent leather loafers. They look like beetles to the untrained eye. She prefers raw chicken necks and those orange marshmallow peanuts. She has a real sweet tooth for the circus variety, and her name is Fluffy." Clarice's hand dropped, and for a moment I thought she might slide right into the rinse sink. Murtis just gaped, her mouth opening and closing like a landed largemouth bass gasping for the swamp. "Fluffy?" Lucille whispered, the words sounding like a blasphemy. "Yes, ma'am," I said, leaning into the delicious absurdity of it all. "I named her Fluffy because when she was a hatchling, she had these soft golden yellow stripes that looked just like marabou feathers. She used to snuggle right into my chenille slippers. I've had her since she was no bigger than a stick of Land O'Lakes, hatched right out of an egg I rescued from a drainage pipe after a particularly cinematic thunderstorm." You raised a dragon in your parlor?" Miss Murtis managed. "Oh, absolutely," I replied cheerfully, letting the ramble take the wheel. "It's quite simple, really, once you get past the initial I might lose a thumb phase. You have to be firm, like training a golden retriever that happens to have 80 teeth and a tail like a battering ram. She's wonderful company, though she hates the humidity just as much as I do. Gets a terrible frizzy buildup on her scutes if I don't apply a generous amount of leave-in conditioner. The sea breeze at the Battery is simply essential for her sinuses." The ladies were paralyzed, trapped in a tableau of southern shock. I could see the questions rotting in their mouths. Does she wear a collar? Has she tasted human flesh? But I just smiled and waited for my hair to be combed out into a glorious, defiant cloud. Later that afternoon, I stepped out of Miss Betty's and into the blinding white-hot glare of King Street. The air smelled of jasmine and ancient secrets. Waiting patiently by the curb, clipped to her sparkly pink leash, was Fluffy. She gave a low, rumbling bellow of greeting that vibrated through the pavement, her tail swishing with a languid grace. "All right, sugar, ready for our promenade?" I chirped, patting her snout. But the real spectacle was the parade. Behind Fluffy, in a perfectly straight, disciplined line, marched 6 tiny, striped alligator hatchlings. They had arrived just weeks ago, and since then they followed her with a devotion that was almost ecclesiastical, like a clutch of scaly, sharp-toothed little ducklings in a funeral procession. I started down the street, Fluffy leading the way on her pink tether, and the Fluffy Juniors clicking their tiny claws rhythmically against the concrete behind her. I smiled at the tourists who froze like statues of salt, and the locals who whispered into their handkerchiefs. Some people might find our little family a bit gothic, a bit strange, or perhaps a bit of a catastrophe. But as for me, walking through the shadows of the oaks with my 10-foot girl and her babies, I reckon it's the only story worth telling. And if anyone has a complaint, they can take it up with Fluffy. She's an excellent listener, and she's always looking for someone to help her with her marshmallow peanuts.